It's a beautiful verb, right? To be. To be. What an important verb. Not the most important verb. Doesn't do anything for you. It's a crutch. It just makes for popcorn ceiling boredom.
You're listening to the Happy Doc Student Podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing clarity to the often mysterious doctoral process. Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Let me and my guests show you how to put more joy in your journey and graduate with your sanity, health, and relationships intact. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Frederick, and this is episode 58. Today I welcome a very special guest. Dr. William Memo Nericcio was born in Laredo, Texas, and educated at the University of Texas, Austin, and Cornell University, where he completed his comparative literature PhD at the age of 26. A professor of English and comparative literature, he is currently the director of the Master of Arts in Liberal Arts and Sciences program and serves on the faculties of Chicano Studies and Latin American Studies at San Diego State University. A prolific writer, his books include Tex-Mex, Seductive Hallucinations of Mexicans in America, The Hurt Business, an edited anthology of playwright Oliver Mayer's early works, Homer from Salinas, John Steinbeck's enduring voice for California, and #Brown TV, Latinas and Latinos on the Screen. Bill's long-awaited meditation on American visual culture, iGene, Permutations of Subjectivity in the Televisual Age of Sex and Race, is currently in prep for UT Press. Bill, welcome to the show.
I'm just so happy to be here. I can't believe I'm here. I'm so lucky.
I can't believe you're here either. And for the listeners who have been with me from the beginning and listened to episode 1, my story, you know that I only call out 2 faculty by name. And one of those is today's guest, Dr. Bill Nericcio. And that's not to say many faculty didn't have a really important part in my doctoral journey. But Bill, one of the things that you brought to the table was just so much insight for me as a first generation college student. And I think back to the classes I took with you and how I learned so much more than just writing, which is one of the topics that I want to make sure that we talk about today. But I'm so excited to have you here because you were such an important part of my journey. And so it's an honor to have you on the show today.
Well, I remember you well. I just moved to San Diego State from the University of Connecticut, where I was miserable, just a miserable assistant professor. And I came out and California was like this brave new world. And you were this outstanding student there. So I'm happy we're still friends.
Yeah, let's give the listeners a little context. This was over 30 years ago.
Yes, this is
that we're counting.
Yeah. I came to San Diego State University from the University of Connecticut in 1991, the fall of 1991. And I guess I would have been working with you either that first semester or the next year.
Yeah. So here we are 30 years later, you're in an English department.
Yeah.
And you deal a lot with writing, which seems to be this lost art.
Yes. It's not a dying art. It's forgotten because we can get by. Most people can get by because of their smartphone or the dumbing down phone, because that's what they do. I love them. I have mine right here. I'm not a Luddite. But because phones and word processors came along, we're just starting to see it now in this generation of undergraduates. You know, this new class, I'm working with a class of 150 freshmen, and most of them probably have only written on word processors. So that 18-year, 20-year process before we moved to the typewriter, where we put pen to paper or pencil to paper to shape our thoughts, is gone. And what happens without that manual imprinting, because it's your hand and your brain, and that just etches something in your head that makes words easier to work with. And as we move now to the iPad, you know, iPads are now the biggest babysitters in America. And we move to the smartphone, that capacity for long form, dedicated, rhetorical sophistication, it's just not being worked on a daily basis.
In your classes, do you ask people to bring pen and paper?
Yes, actually, laptops are forbidden.
Really?
Yeah, you'll bleep it out, but I'm a bit of a to the students because no laptops. They have to have special permission to use iPads or devices. I make them write in class with pen and paper. In fact, they've told me, some of them, that they haven't written with pen and paper essay questions since probably middle school or elementary school. They complain until they realize, I'm the professor. And then what happens to them is magic, discovery. I was just telling a graduate student yesterday who was having problems writing, and I asked them how they write. And of course, they're writing on their word processor. And I said, get into a cafe with a blank sheet of paper and your books and write the first draft in ink. And then I said, what happens is you're going to have to translate that version via word processor onto a computer. And at least your writing will get one edit. Because there's the secret they don't tell you about writing. It's not the epiphany and the discovery that occurs when we write. It's editing, which no one wants to talk about, and forcing yourself to translate from handwritten, first draft, old school, ink and paper onto a word processor. Your essay gets one major edit, because in the translation, you're going to discover, oh, I messed this up. I wrote my whole first book in longhand. And I know, medieval, but
it's so old school.
I know. It's embarrassing. I mean, oh yes, I use cutting edge apps to write my essays. I do. I can if I have to. I have on airplanes, of course. Dashing out a conference paper. As I fly to the event, I am that professor. But my best writing has always come with that built-in edit. It's translation. You're translating from one medium to the other. McLuhan told us the medium is the message, and he was right. He's damn right. And that medium is pen, ink, paper, thoughts, writing.
I feel so validated. I will often say, if you feel stuck, get out an old-fashioned spiral notebook and a pen, and there's just so much resistance.
I know.
It's crazy.
It's not even just the medium, it's the place. I wrote a letter of recommendation for a brilliant undergraduate this morning, and I wrote it on the word processor. But it's not just the medium, it's also the site. Like, you have to get your body and mind in a different place. So I printed it out in the department. I ran down, it's a block to the department office where I printed it. And then I took the hard copy with a pen. I chose a color I never used, green. I even changed the color of my ink. And I copy edited it there in the mailroom. Then I came back to my office. I entered the changes, and there was all kinds of things I hadn't seen. And then I saw something else when I was translating from my copy edit page to the screen. I saw it on the screen. So this idea of changing your place, changing the medium, especially if you have a block, a writer's block, just change what you're doing, because whatever you're doing, you're digging the hole deeper. It's like a tire caught in the mud pit or something.
Stop the madness.
Right. You got to put a log in there to get the tire out,
I love this idea of talking about editing, because, as you know, when you're working on your dissertation or your doctoral project, you can be stuck in a revision cycle, an editing cycle, for literally years sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point of some frustration and misery. They're not used to doing it. So it just feels wrong that they're having to continually edit their work. But that is the key to better writing, right?
Well, yes, because you're not writing for yourself. You know your damn argument. Your reader doesn't. And your reader doesn't even want to read what you're writing most of the time because they're busy as you are. So you really have to craft your prose I was telling my undergraduates just last week, writing is intercourse. There's other people involved, and there's an intimacy and a need for connection that if you're not mindful of the other, of the reader as a writer, well, you're just a selfish. And I don't care if you're a social scientist or even, a biologist, or you're into AI. You still have to communicate with a reader. And what that means is writing is communication that occurs without you being in the room. You're not there to tell them what you mean. You're not there to guide them through the brilliance of your argument. You are not there. You're dead for all intents and purposes. So it's all got to be there on the page, and in a way that is enticing, dare I say seductive, dare I say intimate,
Engaging.
Yeah. Hello.
They have to want to turn the page.
But caveat, it took me 16 years to publish my first book. One, because I'm lazy, but two, because I don't write like other professors. I'm funny, I'm irreverent, I'm dirty. I'm a writer first before I'm a professor of English. And a lot of people who do criticism, they forget that the magic of writing is the magic of discovery. We read things to find out stuff we don't know. And if we reminded ourselves of that, we academics wouldn't get tarred and feathered so much for our crappy writing. And we deserve it. We deserve it. It's hard for me to read criticism because, one, the writing's getting more poor. We don't have James Baldwin's around inspiring next generations of professors to. When I write, my aspirations are Susan Sontag. My aspiration is James Baldwin. I don't want to write like Jonathan Culler, for God's sake. I don't model myself on other critics. I want to write like the best writers in the English language.
And is that one of the tips that you give people who are struggling with writing?
I do. I tell
them
model. My model in graduate school was the most elegant, articulate, and politically savvy professor of his generation, Edward Said. And I used to read his articles, and I had this exercise that I now make my graduate students do, where I would find my favorite paragraph. If you like a writer, well, there's got to be a point in that long form essay that caught your eye. And so I always have them select their favorite paragraph, let's say a chapter in Orientalism. They're reading Orientalism because I'm a post-colonial theorist and they got to read their Said or they're stupid, right? But what I don't tell them is this man is a master of rhetoric, a beautiful writer. And the same way they talk about soccer is the beautiful game. I'm so into, I can't believe it because I've been an NFL head my whole life. And now I'm into Premier League soccer, probably for the English accents. I'm probably all colonized, Chicano colonized English. But there's a beauty in the rhetoric of Edward Said that I think is teachable. And the way I teach it is not sexy. They have to find their favorite paragraph. They have to come to seminar. They have to write out his paragraph in longhand, and then they have to write their own paragraph, their own ideas, their own topic, but using exactly his syntax. That is, if his first sentence is a compound, complex sentence that ends with a list after a colon, they have to do that. They have to utterly mimic, like a damn chimp, his sentence syntax with their own ideas. And then they turn it in and we talk about it. And a very successful exercise, because what it does is it demystifies the process of writing, and it reveals that good writing is actually like good bricklaying. It's a craft. You got to do it for it to be good. And if you don't practice it, it's going to suck. Your wall's going to be all crooked,
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a great tool that you use. Find a paragraph, rewrite it longhand with your own ideas. What are some of the other ones that you use to kind of help students craft this art?
Well, a lot of graduate students now are, God love them, they're not lazy, but because of the internet, they don't read journals in their field. If you're not reading, if you're an English professor and you're not reading the PMLA, I mean, you're kind of an idiot. You're not reading the leading journal in your field, Critical Inquiry, South Atlantic Quarterly. I mean, if I'm not reading those occasionally, or at least looking at them, my God, once a year at my visit to the library, right? You don't know what's going on in your field. You don't know how people are talking. But whenever I give a writing assignment, they're not just turning in a blob to teacher. Here, teacher, am I smart? Right? I mean, that's kind of how we think. I make it a vocational exercise. Instead of telling them I tell them how long it has to be, 15 to 25 pages. But as for the footnoting, Chicago versus APA versus MLA, all of that, I say they have to pick a journal they want to be published in. And they have to find an article in a journal that they want to be published in, that they like, that they adore. They have to Xerox that article, and then they have to turn in their article for that journal stapled to the published article. And a kind of forced exercise in mimicry. Yeah.
Yeah. That's another great.
I do all kinds of weird things to get students to initiate themselves. You're in a guild. If you're a PhD student, you're an apprentice monk. You're a monk. You're a novitiate. You're like in a nunnery. Well, what do the other nuns do? Well, maybe you don't want to do what they all do, but if you're going to be in a guild, if you're imagining yourself that you're going to be a professor of political science, biology, English, well, you better damn well know what at least the middle-aged nuns are doing. You gotta cop their chops. You gotta steal their techniques. You have to be savvy about the techniques of what other folks are doing. And you can't be a revolutionary until you've mastered the guild, right? Because you don't know, you don't even know what your fellow professors are up to, right?
That's right. And you use the term weird. I think your methods maybe are a little unconventional, but what strikes me is,
but I went
well, I know you're weird.
I'm weird. Weird is good. I'm from Austin. I mean, I'm from Laredo.
Weird is good. Weird in a good way.
Weird is good. Portland, Austin, I'm all down for that.
Weird, unconventional, but they're so darn practical, Bill. What you are having students do is just so practical.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I remember being in your class and learning how to write, I know that I'm a decent writer. I'd love to say I'm a great writer. I'm really good at editing.
I thought you were a great writer.
But engaging with what I was reading made me such a better writer. And I don't think I really understood that until I was in your class. And you would open a book and there would be marks all over it, not just highlighting. There would be thoughts, there would be pictures in the margin, and really engaging with what you're reading, I think makes you a better writer.
Yeah. Well, yes, because you have a deep and lived relationship with this static, basically imprint of another person's mind. I mean, that's what writing is. I mean, again, there's no more sexy cutting edge technology than a book, and it doesn't need batteries. The lithium, yeah, you got to put some chemicals in the water to make the paper, and we're sorry for that. And inks are toxic, but they're nowhere as toxic as the stuff that's in our iPads. And what you come to realize is that the Gutenberg, or the Chinese guy that invented movable type, that is a living technology. It's why, everybody said the book was dead. No, book's not dead. Publishing is booming, especially during COVID, because people have nothing else to do in quarantine. And iPads aren't intimate. Books are actually, the medium, again, has a specific kind of technological connection to the biological, which is the human being who created the argument you're reading. And this is as true for a beautiful poem as it is for some cutting edge research on AI. The intimacy comes across in the printed word.
Now, when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned an exercise you do that is like a gallery walk. And I was wondering if you would Walk us through that.
The biggest problem my master's students and the PhD students that I mentor have is no one knows how to write a long form essay anymore. And so I'm always coming up with analogies, though my children tell me I make the worst analogies in the world, which I think is like a badge of honor. But my analogy is that you have to imagine your essay like you're a tour guide, let's say of the British Museum or of the Guggenheim. And let's say the Guggenheim, you're about to leave the 20th century room to go into some special exhibit. Well, if you don't set the folks on your tour up for the room change, especially if it's some 21st century abstract mishmash, you're going to lose them. They're going to, where am I? You know, the old blue-haired ladies are going to faint or something when they see the bourgeois nude or something. So as the tour guide, you prep people. The magic of the long form essay is your paragraph transition. Very simple. Your paragraph transition is where you let folks know, well, we saw that. Now we're going to see this. It sounds like hand-holding. I'm not saying you have to write like a seventh grader, but you do owe it to your reader to make sure that you set them up for what's about to happen. And when some big shit goes down, when you're like the pivot point of your argument, you think you've made it, well, pause, break paragraph, break form, put those 3 little asterisks with a section break. Give them the space. Like when we finish watching a movie and all the idiots walk out of the theater, when you're supposed to sit there during the credits with the music, not necessarily reading the people's names, but thinking about the story that just unfolded before you. Same thing in the long form essay. You got to give your reader breaks, pauses. You've got to change tempo. It's like an opera. You've got to have the fast songs, you've got to have the slow ballads. There's got to be a tempo, a movement, a change. Otherwise, they won't keep reading. If it's, it is interesting to consider how important it is interesting to consider. I mean, the passive voice, every sentence. I'm so sick of the passive voice. I think I've vowed now to never write the passive voice. But of course, that makes for bad writing as well, because we need the passive voice. We just don't need it in 14 sentences in a row.
Okay, do you have a quick, handy trick for slaying the passive voice?
Oh, yes. Well, none of this is done when you're doing the first draft. First draft, right? Like the idiot you are, it is interesting. Is. Then print it out. And then get your pen and circle all the ises, and then see if you can draw an animal with the dots. That's Larry Carver at the University of Texas. I was a sophomore. He took my paper and he did that. He circled every is on the, I'll never forget this because of course I was traumatized. The professors always teach via trauma, right? And he drew a circle around. I must have had 20 uses of the passive voice on one page, and he'd had it. He circled them all, and then he started connecting them. He said, Bill, do you want me to draw an animal? Is that a dog? Is that a giraffe? But I never thought of it because the nuns never taught me. We use the passive voice. I'm in the humanities, right? Film, lit, streaming media, graphic narrative, comics, novels. I write about that stuff. At some point, at least in the United States, our field was convinced that the way to write about the humanities was to use the language of the sciences, not just the sciences, the watered down language that social scientists use to mimic scientists. And what is it they do? They construct the disguise of impartiality, right? I was going to be a bio major when I was my first years of college. And I remember the lab reports had a style. An incision is made along the dorsal cavity, say we're dissecting a shark, poor shark. An incision is made. No one makes the incision. It's always the passive voice. It's happening off stage by some, unseen actor. And so what I try to get my students to understand is that passive voice is important in certain points. The first person is important. but not to be overused, but that you're more likely to grab a reader's attention by using the active voice. William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying reveals a tortured whirl of family and meltdown. Yeah, Faulkner.
Give me more, right?
Yeah,
Give me more.
tell me more, right? As I Lay Dying is an important work in American literature. Who cares? Who cares? Who gives a damn?
But that's a great trick. I've never done that. I'm going to try that on the next thing that I write. Circle every is.
Circle every is. And it's a beautiful verb, right? To be. To be. What an important verb. Not the most important verb. Doesn't do anything for you. It's a crutch. It just makes for popcorn ceiling boredom.
For those of us that remember popcorn ceilings. Huh?
Okay. Styrofoam. Styrofoam prose. Beige, styrofoam, lifeless corporate prose. Stepford Wives.
So even though you're there as this engaged faculty giving students practical tips where they can actually see their writing transform, do you ever have to kind of give people pep talks? Because when writing is critiqued, it can really kind of feel so personal.
Yeah.
Or how do you encourage students that don't think they're good writers, or maybe they're great?
I don't. I'm an English professor.
You know, encouragement
I'm here
happens?
to no. Of course. The way I encourage my students is talking about the thing you and I both understand. And we usually, we probably don't talk about it, but we don't know what our finished essay is about probably till we finish the first draft. And that is that writing itself is a mode of discovery. It's not a product, it's a process, like what the 4Cs people were telling us in the 80s. And because it's a process and a means to an end, it's a pathway to discovery, well, then there's something actually beautiful about it. There's something spiritual about these epiphanies of discovery that take place via the written word. We are ciphers to ourselves. You know, I'm predisposed already to be a Freud neophyte, right? And this idea that there are worlds that we are blind to, that we only discover in our nightmares or our dreams or by surprise or by slip-ups. That's true also of the intellectual discovery process. It's only by finding ourselves through our writing that we become the better scholar that we want to be, to make that impact. You know, I work in the field of ethnic studies, a highly charged, contentious field filled with dedicated folks who are all about progress and social justice. But because social justice advocates are so outraged by the injustices of just our country's sake, they tend to self-righteousness. And I get it. You know, I'm a Mexican American. I get it. In an English department, no less, right? And so I get it. But we're not going to convince allies, especially if they're careful intellectuals, with our righteousness. We actually have to do good research. We have to write well. And we have to maybe sometimes, as I do in my field, use humor. I got to be honest to your listeners, right? Humor cuts both ways. And a lot of academics don't have a sense of humor. A lot of professors go into research because they don't like people. And then they're teachers.
You're telling the big secret.
Yeah, these sociopaths who don't even like people are now teaching really sensitive, articulate people who know the power of words. So I guess we just need another generation of professors who are a little more heartful, a little less heartless, a little less arrogant, you know. That's how I try to inspire my students who lose heart and who want to drop out. I have a student right now, first generation, as a DACA student from Mexico. He's in my graduate program. And I'm working with him to stay in the program because he's got it into his head he can't succeed, that he's an imposter. And he's not an imposter. He's brilliant. He's driven. He's just insecure. Join the club. You know, join the club. It's just keep working. When you're insecure, and you're convinced that you can't make it because you don't have the talent, well, work a little harder. Read one more book than the other graduate students in the room. Stay up one night without your iPad and read the latest issue of a journal in your field, cover to cover, including the ads, and bring yourself up to speed in a way that you respect yourself. And then if you fail, it's fine. Most of us fail, right? I thought I was going to be working at the Sorbonne or Princeton. I'm at State U, but it's heaven. It takes you years to realize that what you think you want is not really what you really want.
Wow. And on that deep thought, that was good stuff. How about some final words of wisdom? Or I know you've always got a favorite quote handy.
I do. One of my mentors, I didn't work with him personally, but my professors did, was Michel Foucault, right? And Michel Foucault has this quote that the madness in which the work of art is engulfed is the space of our work. It is the endless path to fulfillment. It is our mixed vocation of apostle and exegete. And I love those last two words. We are apostles in our field, not following Jesus, but following the guild, following the tradition. For me, the MLA, PMLA, literature. But we're also exegetes, which means we parse the manuscripts. We are like old monks, right, in the monastery. And we don't just worship the God. We also take him apart at night. We put him or her to pieces. And what that means is the only way we're going to contribute something meaningful in our fields, whatever your field is to know your field and then to break your field. And in the process, you will contribute something no other scholar has. And you'll look in the mirror that morning and you'll believe in yourself.
And that day does come.
It does. And
comes.
your students will, the last bit of advice, do you have time for one more?
Oh yeah, please.
This is from 36 years of teaching at the collegiate level. If you want to be a great professor, you don't walk into a room prepared to teach. You walk into a room like an exhibitionist. And what you reveal and show and share is how deeply you're into the stuff that you're teaching that day. Great teaching is not great preparation. Well, it is, you got to prepare, but you're not going in to teach a lesson. You're going into a room to let the students watch you learn from the material. And as they experience that epiphany through you, they rise to the next level.
Well, you just articulated your secret sauce. Because I remember your classes so distinctly, and I remember very little from my undergraduate experience. And that's exactly what you just put into words, was the experience a student has in your class, is seeing that tangible passion. So thank you for sharing that. And for all the listeners, the students to be professors and the professors listening to the show, it was so much fun to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you're enjoying the Happy Doc Student podcast, could I ask you a big favor? Would you be willing to rate, review, and subscribe? It would help me get noticed by more people like you, people who know there is a better way to navigate the doctoral process. The Happy Doc Student podcast is brought to you by expandyourhappy.com, and you can learn more there. One more thing. Just a quick reminder that the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only.